Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, wherever you may be, whenever you may be across the world. Thanks really so much for joining us here live today for Serverless Office Hours. We're streaming on the AWS Twitch channel and Serverless Land YouTube channel, and also via LinkedIn Live. My name is Julian Wood. I'm a developer advocate for serverless here at AWS, and I'm super duper happy to have one of our serverless gurus here at AWS, Brian Zambrano. Brian, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Julian. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, so good to have you. You, I think, one of our new sort of repeat guests. So, so good the first time. We always love to have you back. Now, I know you're in Colorado. I've never visited Colorado, which annoys me intensely because, the mountains and all that kind of thing would be cool. And yeah, Eric on my team, who also hosts the show as well, is based in Colorado. So yeah, we're going to have to somehow link up, whether it's London or Colorado or Seattle or something. But yeah, how did you get to join AWS, and what do you do?
Yeah, so my background is development. So I was a software engineer for about 20 years of actually writing code. And, I'm one of those people who, I started using AWS very early on, pretty much almost as soon as it was, released to the public. And I forget the exact year, but it was a while ago. And it was just one of those pieces of technologies or a platform that it solved problems. I loved using it. It was fun. And over time, I just began using it more and more and getting deeper into it. And at a certain point, I thought, hey, why don't I go and try to work there? So I literally submitted my resume and I got a call back and got in. And I actually entered AWS as an SDE or a software development engineer. So I wrote code, internal code. I wasn't, on a big service team, but I was writing internal code for about a year. And then I transitioned to a solutions architecture role, which is what I do now, about 2 years ago.
Oh, wow, cool. So what kind of code were you writing? Was it, what kind of language were you writing, first of all?
Sure, mostly open source. So I grew up in, I'm one of the strange people who actually grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area. So my hometown is Sunnyvale, California, which is
Cool.
literally the Silicon Valley.
Yeah.
And so I think the nature of being a technology person and that, and being from that area, I kind of came up through the startup rank. So a lot of startups, it's kind of, if you look at my resume, a lot of the startup background. And with that came a lot of open source technology, SaaS
Yeah.
applications. So I've done a lot of Python, JavaScript, a lot of SaaS applications, like I said, it's like, web-based applications.
Cool. Excellent. Well, we're so keen to see what you're going to be showing us. But just looking back over the past week of serverless, last week's serverless office hours, I was actually in Berlin at the Berlin Summit, which was super cool. And so James Bezic had the honor of hosting, and they were looking at the new step functions, things of debugging executions with a new console experience. And this is really cool. The step functions team has been on a tear, I think, over the past year, giving some super new functionality. And this just is one of it. Much easier way in the console to be able to see what's going on with step functions. Then also looking at what's new in serverless, well, a big one, if you're a Lambda writer and you've been super keen, is support for Node.js 16. Yes, we are sorry it took a little bit longer than expected, but what we're actually doing behind the scenes is doing some iterations and making things better behind the scenes, so we'll be able to support Node versions a little bit quicker in the future. But patience is a virtue, so it's here and ready for you to use. So that would be really cool if you want to try that out. If you're an EFS person, a larger number of concurrent file locks. Also, EFS is just sort of getting bigger and broader. Step functions, already mentioned the workflow observability features. And if you're a Kinesis user, then not quite on the data streams, but on the video streams this time. And this has got now some new managed support for image extraction. On the compute blog side, Dan Fox has written all about the Node.js 16, so read that if you're interested. Ben has talked about the step functions in the console. Talia Nassi's got a series of blog posts that she's been going through, talking about sort of more of an intro onto event-driven architectures. She's doing some of the benefits, why you'd be able to use it, how it's going to be useful. Some really sort of interesting ways to think about the importance of event-driven architectures. Then some more information on some deeper kind of things, as deep as Deep Archive with S3 Glacier, using step functions again as a really cool orchestrator to be able to get that out. If you're a Java person, well, there's some cool ways you can do Java on Lambda. Obviously, we've got some managed runtimes, but Christian and Maximilian have put together a blog post on building a custom Java runtime for Lambda. And this just gives you a bit more control of how Lambda can start up specifically, and some really cool additional options to help you with your Lambda. So have a look at that. And then Dan Fox back again, and also step functions and batch and how really they work well together. It is AWS Summit season at the moment. I mentioned I was in Berlin last week. It was amazing. I don't even know how many people there were there. 7,000, 10,000. I wasn't counting them all. We're showing off serverless espresso and having, thousands of people coming up to the booth. I think we served I don't know, 16, 17, 1,800 coffees or something in 2 days. And great to be able to talk to people about serverless. Some amazing conversations, how people are just discovering serverless for the first time, and other people who proper experts coming with their gnarly questions on step functions and EventBridge. So Tel Aviv this week, and then, it carries on. I'm actually going to be at the Milan Summit myself, and some of the other colleagues on my team are attending some of the other ones. So yeah, it'd be great to attend a summit. Lots of cool content to talk about. But of course, today let's talk to Brian, because we're going to be talking about a product that's near and dear to a lot of people's hearts. As you start going from hello world applications to something more, then you need to be talking about serverless CICD. Zach Jones, Manuel, thank you for joining us. You've pulled me up again. AWS Summit India is missing on the list again. I know you mentioned this last time and I forgot to do it. I will try and remember to do it. Pokira Panda, yes, India. I will stick it on the list for next week so we don't forget. But sidebar, apologies for over that. But yeah, serverless CICD. Brian, near and dear to a lot of people's heart, as I said, as you're moving from hello world applications, not even necessarily into enterprise applications, but anytime you want to be deploying software, CI/CD is going to be important.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think this is one of those things where, pretty much, unless you're just playing around with something, just kind of dabbling with serverless, deploying from your laptop, I think is fine for just getting started. But as soon as you start moving something, into a QA or a testing, or especially a production environment, you have to have CID. It's sort of like table stakes nowadays for any modern application.
So when people are thinking of CI/CD, just to sort of set the stage from the beginning, CI/CD, we're just talking about the names. It's continuous integration, continuous development, continuous deployment. What are the kind of terms that people should be thinking about?
Yep, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I look at this, and I think this has evolved over the years too. I know definitely, like, I'm a little bit older, so in my career, this has kind of changed, and people like to argue about the D, is that deployment or develop, integration, is that deployment or development? So, the way I think about this is, with our code, we want to be able to the integration part is, get all of our code merged together, run test, make sure that it actually can build correctly if you have, like, for example, a compiled language. So I see that as sort of like the integration part, is like making sure that the code actually builds and is healthy, free of bugs to the best of your ability. And then, the D is, can you actually, do you want to deploy it out? Can you deploy it out? If you don't want to deploy it out automatically, can you at least get it into a state where it can go through that ceremony where, someone clicks a button and watches it go through the process. And so, the whole idea here is that we want to automate as much as we can. So, what I tell people too is, like, if you don't want to do the continuous deployment, so like automated hands-off deployment, at least set yourself up so that you could do that. And that just puts you in a really great position if you ever want to go there. And just the fact that, you're getting close to that means that you've automated pretty much everything.
Yeah, that's an important thing to tease out. Thanks for doing that, because a lot of people sometimes get a little bit of afraid of CI/CD. Thinks as soon as I publish my code, if the tests all pass, and it goes straight to production, and well, on my tests or test coverage all good or whatever. And in an ideal world, they would be great, but we know that's not the case. And there are a lot of business reasons why you may not want to be able to release that final stage into production. And having a manual override is absolutely fine. And having all your tests there and having those stages up and everything as automated as possible will only make you more confident on your release pipeline. And remember, this doesn't also necessarily have to be just code in production. Your CI/CD pipeline can be your UAT or your QA or your development environment, and just gives you some cool rigor that if you know that your development environment runs through its pipeline, your UAT, your QA environments, you're going to have more confidence in sending things to production.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and then, another thing I like to point out with this too is that, with CI/CD and other things in technology, there's an art and there's a science to it. I think here today we're going to cover some of the sciences. We're going to show you the how, and how to get started and how you can do these things. But the art of it is going to be up to you, your customers, your teams to figure out what makes sense for you. Generally speaking, there's not a one size fits all. Every team is going to do this a little bit differently. And like you said, Julian, it kind of comes down to, what level of comfort do you have with some of these, the methods of doing this or the mechanisms to deploy code out.
Excellent. Well, Brian, I know you have some stuff to show us. So do you want to share your screen? And while you're just getting that up and running, we do have some other people who've joined us. Anka Tripathi, thank you for joining us via YouTube from India. Cool to know that we've got lots of people interested in Indian things on the show today. And also I can see actually via the AWS Twitch channel, we've actually got a lot of people who've joined us. So obviously Brian is a celebrity in his own right, and serverless CICD is super important. So yeah, to all the people who may not have joined serverless office hours before, thanks so much for joining us. So, Brian, I have your screen up. What are you actually going to be taking us through today?
Cool. Yeah. Well, let's go through some of the parts of this workshop. This is it's if you go to the URL, maybe you can put this in chat,
Yeah,
Julian.
I will do.
Yeah, CICD workshop, cicd.serverlessworkshops.io. So this is a workshop that has taken different forms over the years, really. It used to be based on just raw CloudFormation, then it evolved to use CDK to build CI/CD pipelines. And I took it and implemented the same ideas and went a little bit further with some of the implementation. And it's using a feature of SAM called SAM Pipelines. So we're going to walk through this a little bit, not the whole thing. We don't want to walk through the entire workshop. We just don't have time. But I want to walk through a few different parts of it and kind of get everyone familiar with how SAM Pipelines works, what it does. We'll touch on a few things that SAM offers, like running an API locally, and we'll just go through that. And if we have time, I can even show how you can use SAM Pipelines to deploy to run CI/CD with GitHub and GitHub Actions. So that could be a kind of a fun thing to walk through also.
And remember, we are live. Sorry to just barge in, Brian, but we are live. Brian and I are both live here, as you can see. So please send us your questions and comments. We'll try and answer them throughout the show as we can, or we'll be able to take them offline if that's going to be easier for you. So I've just posted the link to the workshop that Brian's going to be going through. So you're going to have sort of a live view of what Brian's going to be looking at, but you'll be able to do the workshop yourself at your own pace if you want to at another time.
Yep. So let's just get going. I mean, one thing here I will add a little asterisk here is that some of these the steps can take a little while, and so I have the pre-made version that we're going to iterate on, and I have a brand new SAM application also that we can look at. But let's just get started with what do we have here? What does this application actually do? We've talked about, or you've talked about SAM before, so I don't think we have to go through that. But real quickly, this is just a very basic Hello World AWS SAM application. It happens to be using Python. It really does nothing. If you go and look at the application code, it's just printing out a message, Hello World. And then the one thing in here which is a little bit different is I take the function name. I'm going to spit the function name back out. And so that's all it is. We're going to use this as our example application. So, one of the first things in the workshop that I cover is this command or this feature of AWS SAM, which is running locally. And so when you have a serverless application that is fronted by an API gateway endpoint, you can actually run that locally, and it emulates the API gateway layer. And so there's this command in here which says SAM local start API, and you can tell it what port to run on. And let's just go and do that real quick, and we'll see what actually happens. So hopefully you can see my terminal, and if you can't, let me know.
Yeah, looks all good.
All right, so I'm going to run this command. So it's just SAM local start API port 8080, and now that's running. So if I come back over to my browser, I can hit that port localhost and /hello. And it takes a little while, and you can see there I have a message that comes back. So the message is hello world. It has the function name. The one interesting thing here is if you come back and look at the output of this, it looks very familiar. So if you've ever gone to look at your CloudWatch logs for a Lambda function, this formatting, this request ID, this looks pretty much identical to what you would see in the output for a CloudWatch, the Lambda function CloudWatch logs. The other interesting thing here is you'll see that there's this line here which I'll highlight. What it says is skip pulling image, use local one, and then it references a Docker image. So behind the scenes, what's happening is that SAM is actually emulating the Lambda runtime via a Docker image. And so here you can see it's using this emulation, Python 3.8, and it actually has the correct architecture, which I've asked for, which is x86. And so if you do this yourself, the first time you go through this process and you hit that endpoint, it might take a little while. And if you come back and look at the output of the start API command, you'll see it saying pulling image. So I've been doing this recently, and so I've had the image, cached here. But if I change, as an example, if I change the Python version, so if I change it from 3.8 to 3.9, Sam's going to pull the right image for me to provide that correct emulation. So I'll stop there. Do you have any questions, Julian, or should we keep going?
Someone's quickly that have come in talking about SAM specifically. Why would I use this instead of the serverless framework? And really good question. My comment on that is, at least you're thinking of using a framework. Seriously, if you're building serverless applications, use a framework, whether it's a serverless framework or AWS SAM. There are other ones as well, from Terraform and Pulumi and other kind of serverless frameworks, even Chalice. I would suggest using a framework. Now, they're going to have different features. Serverless framework has got a bunch of frequent features that SAM does, and SAM has some features that serverless framework does. So I would suggest just having a look. Both of them, what Brian is showing, being able to build a function with infrastructure as code and being able to test them locally is what both of the frameworks kind of do. I'm not quite sure if serverless framework does the CI/CD kind of stuff, or they do it but in a different way. So yeah, at least you're using a framework. That's at least a good start. And in fact, Proville says serverless.com can do this. So thank you very much. There are other questions. I will get back to it about sort of what you should be doing offline. We'll chat about what you should be doing locally and what you should be doing in the cloud. But yeah, we will cover that.
All right. Yeah, well said. So the next part in here is around unit tests. So of course, CI/CD, one of the things which pretty much every CI/CD pipeline is going to do is run your unit tests. I do think there is a little bit of a sticking point here and some dialogue within the serverless community is, can I run my unit tests locally, or can I run things locally? That is a question which has come up, over and over and over again. And I think though, the way people are kind of landing on, moving things into the cloud as your application gets more and more complicated. At the same time, it is possible and really useful to run your tests locally. Here in this workshop, we go through a couple of steps, and I'll show you here in a second on how to run our unit tests. Again, the caveat here is this is a really simple application. You can go quite a long way, in my opinion, with running your tests locally, especially with compiled language like JavaScript or Python. At a certain point, that might it might become harder and harder. My guidance to customers also is to really make sure you're writing good code, layered code. Put in the right abstractions. As you do that and write really, really good code, that's going to make it easier and easier to run your tests locally. And there's just, the fact of the matter is, we like being able to do things locally. It really shortens that development loop. So over here, I can run my PyTest tests. So, here it's worth noting that the tests are really, really simple. There is really nothing going on that's that requires the cloud. Here's the test which I just ran. So you can see, all it's doing is I create a mock. I'm passing this mock event into my Lambda handler. I'm passing in a mock API gateway event also, and I'm just making sure that the return value is what I expect. So here, if I add in an exclamation and run my tests again, that's going to fail. So this is really useful. And another thing which I wrote an interactive tic-tac-toe game that I presented at reInvent last year. And one trick that I did was, and this is again specific to Python, but I think it's possible in other languages, is I was running something called PyTest Watch, or PTW. And so what this does is it's going to watch all of my code, and as my code changes, it's going to rerun my tests automatically. So you can see here, it's running, it failed. When I come back and update my code, and I'll hit save, and when I come back, that's going to run, and it'll have passed. So I use this, like I said, last year for my tic-tac-toe game. And what I tell people is it was the most over-engineered tic-tac-toe game you can imagine. But this flow really worked out. This is my personal preference as I'm developing serverless applications, is to, and I'm mostly a Python developer. So this works out really well in the Python world for me. So your mileage may vary, of course, but it is possible to go quite a long way and get some real developer speed ups with this mechanism, this way of writing tests and code. All right. So now that we have some tests, let's get to the meat of this talk, is how do we go and actually implement this using SAM pipelines for real in the cloud. So this is an example that I've already built up. Let me switch over to another window, which is a brand new repository. It hasn't done anything. There's nothing in here at all. This is literally a hello world application, which I haven't changed at all. I still can test over here. I haven't made any modifications, so I can run my tests and they work fine. And let me make sure I can fire that up in VS Code too. I'll get that up and running here in a second. Let's get to SAM pipelines. So SAM pipelines is a command from SAM, and let me just show you what it looks like. And really what SAM pipelines is it's a way to bootstrap configuration, CI/CD configuration for a variety of cloud providers. And so the cloud providers, or the CI/CD providers that it works with are Jenkins, Code Deploy, GitHub Actions. There's a few others, but let's just go through it. We're not going to go through the whole thing, but let's just go through and look and see what this gives us. So the command is SAM pipeline, and we're going to say init, and we want to bootstrap this. So we're going to say, like, this is a brand new pipeline that we're going to create. And so I'm going to say this is, I want to use a quick start template, which we maintain. We own and maintain those. And so here now, this is where we're seeing what CI/CD providers do we have available to us. This little wizard that we're walking through, it's going to change depending on what you select here.
That's super important, just to interject there, to say that this isn't only AWS code pipeline. Lots of people are using whether it's Jenkins on-prem or in the cloud, or Bitbucket pipeline, super popular in enterprises. Never mind the huge functionality that GitLab and GitHub Actions has. So yeah, please don't think because AWS SAM is an AWS tool that we're only limited in inverted commas to the AWS CI/CD tools. Look at the good list here of very popular CI/CD
exactly
services.
Yep. Yeah. And the way it's important to know here, I think I'll just add on to that, is the way this was implemented is that the AWS SAM team went and did the hard work of configuring all of this for us. So let's go through an example with GitHub, and you'll see what I mean. But at the end of this, what we're going to have is a big YAML file which configures GitHub Actions, so that when we push our code, the actions actually run, and we get a CI/CD run when we push to the main branch, or when a feature branch is updated. So let's just walk through this and see what happens. So I'm going to select GitHub Actions. Here what it's saying is, hey, you need to have two stages here. Remember, this implementation is not only going to run our tests or give us the ability to run our tests, it's actually going to deploy our code at the same time. And to that end, it's going to ask for two different stages. So this might be a dev and a prod, or a dev and a stage, or whatever. And this is not stagnant. It's going to start with two stages. You have the ability to augment this after the fact and add a third stage if you wanted to. But let's just go through this and say, like, okay, it says, do you want to walk through this setup now? Yes, we do. So I'll hit yes. And so this configuration name, let's just call this dev. So stage number 1 is dev. And then I'm going to select environment variables for my configuration. You know what? I'm in the wrong window. So I knew live demos, right, Julian?
Yeah. That's part of it. I was looking and thinking, where are we going here?
Let me go with 2, and that didn't work. So I use environment variables to configure my application, or my AWS to authenticate. So let me go back over to office hours. In this one, it will work. So Bootstrap. So let's try this again. This one I'm confident will work. So quick starts. Now we're going to do GitHub Actions. And we want to set that up, and we're going to do dev. There we go. Now environment variables will work. So that's great. So now what region? Yep, I want to do US West 2, which is Oregon. And so now this is also interesting. So, our CI/CD process that Sam is going to bootstrap for us requires an IAM user to actually do the deployment. So it's going to be deploying our code. That code, it's going to be executing Cloudformation for us, building resources. So it's going to say, it says, hey, like I need an IAM user to actually perform this. It's going to assume this role and then go and do it for us. So here it says, do you want us to create, do you want me to create one for you? And here I'll say enter so that it will go and create that for us automatically. And the same thing here, reference application. So I'm just going to hit enter and we do not use the image Lambda functions. And so that all looks good. And so I'm just going to hit enter. Yes. Now it says, hey, I've only detected one stage. You need two. So do you want to do the next one? And let's hit yes on that. And so I'll call this one prod environment variables, and this is going to be the same thing.
But also this can be set up across multiple accounts. So you can have, one account that's going to be running your CI/CD pipeline and deploying infrastructure in other accounts. So yeah, SAM Pipelines is flexible that it's not everything in a single account.
Yep. And so now here it's asking something very specific around the GitHub Actions. So here it's saying, hey, when GitHub Actions is actually going to go and deploy your code, I need to reference some access keys. And so here, what I've done is I've set those up as actual secret values in GitHub. And so here I can just hit enter, and it's going to reference those secret values from the configuration file that this will create. And we're going to use main, and that's the template. And so now here it's going to say, hey, tell me what stage one is. We told it what stages we were creating, and now it's going to tell us what order are these. So stage number one is dev. And then here I'm going to call this office hours example dev. This is important, and this can be a little bit confusing, honestly, when you're getting started. So what this is asking us is, hey, this pipeline is going to go and deploy an actual Cloudformation template for you. It's going to deploy your Lambda functions, an API gateway, things like that. So what's the name of the SAM application that you actually are going to deploy in stage one? And so here I'm going to call it office hours example dev. And we'll do the same thing with production one. Odd. Okay, and there we go. So let's go back and look at this and see what actually happened. So again, remember, this is a brand new application. There's not much to it. I haven't removed anything from the actual SAM templates. But what SAM Pipelines did is it created this GitHub/workflows pipeline.yaml function file for us. So this is it's really just a configuration file which defines a workflow in GitHub Actions to build, test, and deploy our code across two different stages. When you look at this, you can see how much code is in here. So if you get to the bottom, it's about roughly 250 lines of configuration code. The thing which I love about this is it's completely possible to go and do this all, by yourself. I've certainly done it whenever it's time to build, to set up CI/CD. You go through and you're reading documentation. You're trying to figure out, how to actually get your CI/CD tool of choice or system of choice to work the way you want it to work. And this saves you a lot of time. So this just works. And the other great thing is that if you don't like exactly how it behaves, you can come in and change this. There's nothing which says that you are beholden to the way that SAM Pipelines is going to initially create this for you. So yeah, so I'll pause there, Julian, here if there are any questions or if you have any feedback.
I'll get the questions, but I think that's sort of peeling the onion back. I think when people see the file it's created, they sort of understand, because I know I've had questions before of, Are you talking to the GitHub API? Are you then talking to the Code Pipeline API, the Bitbucket API to create this? And as you can see, it's just the format that GitHub expects, GitHub/workflows, pipeline.yaml, and 240 line of code generated for you. And that's the one part. And the other super useful part is that it's building those IAM roles for you to be able to deploy this. So the two different parts of it, building this whole configuration file, but also the IAM credentials that you can then use to deploy this across multiple accounts. So yeah, that's the sort of magic sauce that actually SAM Pipelines is doing. That security role creation, and then pre-populating this file.
Yep, exactly. So you can see here, these are those execution, those IAM roles that we were referencing earlier, or that SAM actually was creating for us. So let's go and try this. So if you look in here, if I do git remote, git remote show GitHub. So I have one GitHub remote, which is, I've got a public repository, which I just created about an hour ago. And if I do a git status, you can see that all my code is checked in, but now I have this one directory which has this configuration. So let's add this, and I'm just going to commit directly on master, and let's see what happens. So again, this is live, so I haven't tested this exact workflow just yet. Let's git add, git commit. That's fine. We don't need my author. Git push. Okay, there we go. So I've pushed that now to GitHub. Let's go over there and see what actually has happened, or what is happening. So I'll open this window. And that's the wrong one. It's this one. I think it's that one. That was Serverless Office Hours. Yep. Okay, so there we go. So I'm in my repository. All I've done is I've clicked on this Actions tab. And we can see here that we have one workflow running. It's orange or yellow, and kind of blinking. So let's click into that and see what's happened.
So just uploading the file has committing the file has automatically created a pipeline and kicked it off.
Exactly. Yep. And we can go back and look at the config and show how this actually worked. But the first thing that you'll see here is that I have a pipeline. So you can see that a visual representation of what happens. So the first thing are our tests. From there, there's a branch. So it can either go to this build and deploy feature, or it goes to this other flow here, which is build and package, deploy testing, integration tests, and deploy prod. So again, this right here is a visual representation of what the YAML file is showing us, or the YAML file, better said, the YAML file defines this workflow here. So if I click into this build and package, let's see what's actually happening. So you can see there that it's set up a job.
Can we just zoom in a little bit just to read the text? Thanks.
How's that?
All good.
All right. So it set up this job. You can see here, run actions, run actions, run actions. Let's go back and look at configuration. So now we're in this build and deploy feature stage. So this thing uses 3 different GitHub actions that someone else has written and maintained. Some of them are from GitHub, I believe. I believe this actions, set up Python v2, checkout code. Those are from GitHub. This other one is an AWS action, which is setting up SAM. So that is going to be pulling, installing AWS SAM for us. And then the next set of of steps are running a SAM build, and you can see here, you can see the command right here. And then the next thing is assuming this testing pipeline user role. And really what's doing it now is it's done the build. It's actually going to go and deploy these artifacts, the SAM artifacts for us. And so it looks like this one is done. So if I come back to the summary, that's small again there. Let's make it a little bit bigger. So it looks like it's deploying my testing environment. So let me go back over to Cloudformation, and I'm going to refresh my Cloudformation stack and see what happens. And look at that. Lo and behold, we have a new Cloudformation stack called Office Hours Example Dev that is actually in progress. That's being deployed out for us right now. So hopefully that flow made sense. Julian, are there any questions, or do you have any commentary on this?
No, that's good. I think we've got quite a few questions previously in the chat about sort of the local testing, and we will get back to that. So please hang on. We will talk about that. But yeah, so at the moment, this is in one particular account. We've got example dev. If we had different roles in different accounts, we could jump to another account, and we would have then seen the different CloudFormation stack in a separate role in a separate account as well.
Yeah, exactly. If you look at the commands which are actually being run, so here it's running SAM deploy, gives it a stack name which is pulled out of the actual branch name. There's a region, and so this helps you get started. You're perfectly allowed to come in and edit this. So if you want to work with different regions or different accounts, that is possible. So there's nothing that, like I said earlier, nothing that makes you that we're forcing you into. Like, this is a great starting point, and you can iterate on this from here on out.
Cortex Compiler, thanks for joining us via Twitch with a question. Can the CI pipeline package the SAM template and related code artifacts and upload them to an artifact repo using a version or even the commit hash, and then deploy that same artifact to multiple environments? Do we essentially have to leverage the S3 bucket and S3 prefix options?
Maybe can you restate that one again for me? I think the question is, can you package it up, put it in a different location, and reference it from various locations?
Yeah, I think that's so. I don't know if this is a SAM specific question, because yeah, whatever you can do in SAM, I mean, you can use the SAM S3 bucket options in there to have your own bucket. At the moment, SAM is just automatically creating an artifact bucket, but you can, I suppose you could do your own. You could certainly do your own S3 bucket with SAM.
Yep. Yeah, and I think that question I think it reminds us that everyone's wants to do this a little bit differently. Everyone has different preferences, different requirements. There's so many different permutations of this. So that specific question, I think that's possible. I don't know the exact details on how to implement that, but if it's technically feasible, technically possible, you can do it with these, in a CI/CD pipeline.
And also, if this even bootstraps your CI/CD pipeline, you can use other AWS CLI tools within the pipeline to do. If you do need to then go and create some other infrastructure, use the CLI, or have separate SAM templates. You could have a separate SAM template that went out and deployed S3 buckets in various regions. But I mean, one of the features I really like about SAM is the way it can actually automatically deploy the S3 artifacts, and you don't need to worry about it. Cortex Compiler does say the S3 references were SAM specific. So yeah, if it's anything you can do in SAM, this is just in fact using SAM, not even under the hood, but it's using SAM within GitHub Actions to do whatever it is.
Right. Yep. So if we go back and look at this pipeline, so this is done now. And if I go and look at the CloudFormation console, now I've got two different stacks. So I've got office hours example dev and prod. If you look at the outputs from these both have their own unique API gateway endpoints, which we've deployed the exact same code into two different places, completely unique and separate. So this would be an example of how you could use this to actually deploy dev, test, stage, prod. You could expand this out as needed, and you've got the full power of GitHub Actions for you. Again, what we provide with SAM pipelines is a great starting point. So let me switch over to a different version of this, which uses code pipeline. I know that we all have different choices. Code pipeline, it does do a lot of really cool things. And so let's just go take a look at that one real quick. So here, this is a pipeline which I've already set up, and so it's the same idea as any other, as GitHub Actions or as another CI/CD provider. So the one thing which is a little bit different here is that it goes through it's triggered on a source code commit. So you can see here I'm watching a code commit repository that triggers this whole flow. So it kind of goes through something similar where it's going to build and package the code, deploy it to a test environment, and then deploy to a production environment. The one thing which is unique here, and again, this was bootstrapped with SAM pipelines. The one thing which is a little bit different or unique is that there's this update pipeline step. And what this is a self-updating pipeline. So that'll become more clear when we look at what's going on here. So again, this is my application. Not a lot, really, it's not much different at all from the other one that we just looked at. The artifacts or the configuration that is created from SAM pipelines, there's a few of them. So the first is this code pipeline.yaml file. This is analogous to what we were just looking at with the GitHub Actions configuration file, except that this is specific to AWS and it's really just a CloudFormation template to be said very simply. So this is literally just a CloudFormation template. This one's pretty complicated. So if you go back and look at this, scroll to the bottom of this one, this is nearly 700 lines of code to actually build this pipeline. There are additional configuration files over here in this pipelines directory. So if I look at one, which would be unit tests, so here's a configuration file to run my unit tests. So the thing which is really neat about this is that the CloudFormation template is set up such that it's self-updating. And what does that mean? That means when I come in here and actually update the definition of my code pipeline, there's nothing more I have to do. So I don't have to go in and click buttons and run a CloudFormation update. I just check code in. The pipeline is going to update itself automatically. And let's take a look at what that looks like in real life. So if you look here, you can see that I don't have unit tests yet. All I have is my source code, the update pipeline, this build and package, and then 2 deployment steps. So let me go and I'm going to update this code and I have to reset Git so that I can grab my unit tests. And so that's this guy. So what I've done here is I've updated, look at it, I've updated my config slightly so that, and actually I'm in the wrong repository. I apologize. Okay, so what I've done here is I've uncommented a few pieces of configuration from my code pipeline definition or from that CloudFormation template. And so here what I'm really doing is I'm adding a new step. So I'm adding a unit test step before it goes into the deploy phases. Okay, so this configuration existed in the CloudFormation template that was created for me. The difference here is that I've just uncommented it. I just uncommented it. That's it. So I'm going to push this code, and it's going to take a little bit because there is some latency while all the building and the packaging goes on. But let's take a look here and see what happens after a couple minutes. So Julian, that's your cue to
Certainly,
to
yeah.
spill something.
No, not at all. We do have some questions coming, which I have left for this exact moment. Zach Jones, well, thanks for joining us again. AWS Coplan uses nested CloudFormation stacks to create and deploy different stages? Question mark. Do you know, Brian? Or
so the question was, does it use nested stacks to do this?
Yes.
No, it doesn't. If I come over to, and then I'm going to keep an eye on this, but right now we're in the update pipeline stage. I'm going to come back to the question, but we're in the update pipeline stage. After this happens, after this actually runs, we're going to see a new stage underneath this, which is going to be called unit tests. So I want to make sure we don't miss it, but if we do, we'll come back and we'll check it out. So if you come back over here into my CloudFormation stacks, you can see here that there's one file or one stack called SAM app pipeline. So this is that pipeline, that CloudFormation template that we were just looking at. So this is that really big one, like I said, almost 800 lines. So, excuse me, this is the definition of our pipeline. So the pipeline that we're looking at here, it was created via that CloudFormation template. There's nothing nested about it. The way that it updates itself is a feature of CloudFormation. So during when during that trigger where I'm checking code in, the pipeline will actually, see, or the repository will see like, hey, something's changed, and it will go through and it'll update itself during the run. And so if we come back over here and refresh, you'll see that the SAM app pipeline is now updating because I've changed it. I've changed this template. And so again, that's where it's going to notice that it's changed and then update the pipeline itself. So it's a little bit meta, but hopefully that makes sense.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I just want to catch on when we're talking about the testing event app locally, SQS in particular. Thanks, Tech Guy 21 joining us. Recognize, so thanks for joining us again by AWS Twitch. So there's a lot of talk about testing locally and what you should do. And Passetto 007 replies. Thanks. Really, this show is awesome when people are replying to other people's comments, helping each other out. That's all the power of community. So it's great to see. But there are projects that emulate the whole AWS. Like local stack and things like that. I mean, a good one for serverless is something called Architect as well. But I mean, what I'd like to think as well is to sort of think about your testing in the cloud and work out, what are you actually testing? Are you testing the reliability of SQS, for example, or are you actually just testing your code? Now, if you're testing the reliability of SQS, for example, well, there are going to be other kind of things that you want to be able to test in the cloud to do that. But your main thing that's actually brittle, well, I'm not dissing on your code, but my code, all right, is the thing that's actually going to be more brittle. If you've seen any of the code I've been trying to write this week, I've been struggling, but that's a sidebar. So the point is, that's the thing you want to test. And so really you want to be iterating on your local code and not trying to mock SQS, DynamoDB, EventBridge, SNS, and all those kind of things. I know it's the model that people have come from, and sort of complete understanding, because you didn't have the power of the cloud at your disposal. So we do have a part of SAM called SAM Accelerate, and Cortex compiler hits the button on the head, talks about for fast testing in AWS. And what SAM Accelerate does, just like we've been seeing SAM now, is that deploys your CloudFormation stack to the cloud. And then whenever you just save your Lambda function or your API gateway definitions or your step function state machine, it's just going to do a code update quickly to the cloud and sync that up. Literally takes a second or so. But that means when you can then test your function locally or in the cloud, and you're using SQS behind the scenes, SNS behind the scenes, DynamoDB behind the scenes, but in the cloud. So your IAM is going to work, your functionality is going to work. You don't have to spend more time mocking things locally than actually doing stuff on your code. So definitely have a look at SAM Accelerate. It's really powerful to be able to do the testing in the cloud and not have to mock everything locally. Now, if you do need to mock things locally, that's still available, local stack, Architect, and things like do that. But think of this concept of how you can test your functions locally and do all the rest of the testing in the cloud, and try and get into the cloud as quick as possible. And SAM Accelerate is going to do that automatically. James Foreman, we appreciate you watching. Thank you from YouTube. This talk equals really good. Thank you, Brian, for making this really good.
All right.
Then now there were some other sort of security questions that were coming in. Let me just scroll back. Just before we get into that, can SAM generate CDK code instead of YAML? Not quite, because CloudFormation relies on YAML, and so there is a beta out at the moment that you can actually use CD code. SAM can deploy CDK code, but SAM's not actually going to generate the CDK code, because ultimately the CDK code is also going to generate CloudFormation under the hood. I think I've mangled up that explanation a bit poorly, but basically, whether using CDK or using SAM, that is going to be generating CloudFormation, and that's actually what you're working with. Ankar, thanks again. Does SAM Pipelines create IAM roles in AWS accounts used for deployment? And there was also a similar related question from Malkit. Usually we run dev and prod in separate AWS accounts. Great best practice. How to provide separate AWS secret and access keys for separate accounts. Well, Brian, do you want to cover this, or?
Oh, so you kind of put me on the spot here. So good question.
Sorry about that.
So the question is, how would you enable this across accounts with different secrets? Was that right?
Yes. Well, how we're thinking of the multi-account kind of thing. I suppose the thing I was picking up from here is using AWS secret and access keys. You don't necessarily have to use secret and access keys because the roles that are generated, and correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, the roles that are generated by SAM pipelines can be assumed by other services. So you can then assume a role in another account and run the actions. You don't necessarily need secret and access keys. Is my understanding correct?
I think it is. Yeah, I don't want to come out and say definitively yes
Yeah.
because I don't know 100%. But yeah, I mean, if we come back and look at this code in here, so here is. I mean, you're definitely correct in that, or that we're correct in that. There are several roles which are created on our behalf, and we don't have to have SAM create these for us. We can just reference existing roles or roles that you craft by hand or via some other mechanism, and so you can see that here. So this is the testing Cloudformation execution role. So that's when it goes through the dev or the test stage, what role is it going to go and assume. And there's also this little helper script. This is referenced during the actual pipeline, is that this I think it's the code build stage will actually go and execute this function to assume the right role to actually do what it needs to do. So as you start, I mean, the point that I want to make in here is that there's not a lot of voodoo here. There's not a lot of black magic. This is just this is a way to get started and to quickly go from nothing to something. And so once you start looking around here, and this is what I did when I was learning this feature, is I just went through the wizard, looked at the files that were created, and then you can start making these connections and see actually what is going on. It's not that complicated. It's just a lot of stuff. And so again, like you can come in here, figure out and understand what's going on, and then make adjustments as needed.
Yeah. Also talking about just the local testing, pro evils, seems like it would take longer to do testing as you would have to set up, configure your project to do the test as just mocking it from the get-go, avoiding the initial setup config. Well, that is correct. But the point is you want to be doing your unit testing, as Brian was showing earlier when he was doing the SAM local invoke. You do your unit testing really, really, really quickly. And that's while you're iterating on your function. Change your variable name, change your input parameters, all those kind of things that you can do on your sort of local inner loop as fast as you can. And then as soon as you're going beyond that, then you sort of take it up to the cloud, and you're still probably going to run some unit tests in the cloud as well to make sure that is properly follows your pipeline, what you want to do in your pipelines, and then do your integration tests as well. And Cortex compiler speaks that as well, to have the stubbed unit tests that don't rely on cloud infrastructure. Then the integration tests can be done in AWS. And yeah, the ability to deploy it to a prod-like stack from a feature branch is super helpful. Yeah, and this is something we didn't quite cover is, with this, it doesn't have to be one CI/CD pipeline. Every feature branch, every commit can be its own branch, an own pipeline that can be very easily created. And that gives you a huge amount of flexibility that a developer can just create a feature branch, and the CI/CD pipeline is there ready for you, and off you go.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I think one thing I'll note also is that in the pipeline that is created for you automatically with GitHub Actions, it has this really nice little feature where it will notice, the configuration will notice any branch that starts with the letters or the word feature. And if it notices a feature branch, what will happen is it will go on this this other bottom route here. So it will run your tests, and then it will go and it will build and deploy a feature branch based on the name of your branch. And so there's nothing that you need to do in order for that to work. We could actually go and try it real quick, but I think we're getting close on time. The other really neat thing here is that once, let me zoom in, apologies. Once that branch is actually deleted, the same thing happens. This pipeline will notice that the branch was deleted, and it will go through and do a cleanup for you using the SAM delete command. So that's a really nice feature, in my opinion, with the GitHub integration or the GitHub Actions integration.
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, as we said before, being able to spin up these pipelines very quickly and tear them down at the end. There isn't a concept of overloading your build server. You've got all of GitHub or all of Code Pipeline at your disposal. Run as many pipelines as you need, and then you just tear them down when you don't need them anymore.
Exactly. Let's try that real quick in this final minutes and see if we can trigger that. In the going back to the code pipeline, so what I've done there is, where we left off is, I pushed that code. You can see that now that code, which actually runs unit tests. So now we do have unit tests running. So that's going to use code build to actually run our tests. So if I pop over to here, this is the run. This is the code build run, which actually ran, my PyTest. So you can see here, I had one test that passed. That's fantastic. And so the rest of the pipeline continued on forward. Yeah, we may run out of time here, but what I did is I pushed another bit of configuration code, and this one's to the actual template. And so the changes here is that I added some different deployment preferences. And so what that means is that, we've got different ways of deploying code out. So there's just all at once, like let's just, we're using Lambda, so let's just deploy some new Lambda code and we'll switch everything over and we'll move on with our day. And that's great for, for non-critical workloads, that's fine, or for, development, things like that. But in a production workload, we have different ways of doing that are safer. One of those is different versions of canary deployments. And so here what I've done is I've updated my SAM template to say, hey, when I'm rolling this out in my production stack, what I want you to do is I want you to roll this out in this canary configuration. And so that is, I want 10% of my traffic to move to my new Lambda functions for 5 minutes. And if there are any errors, which I'm monitoring via this canary, this CloudWatch alarm, if there are any errors, I want you to roll that back. Otherwise, after 5 minutes, 5 minutes is over, move the rest of my traffic over there, and then we'll call that a successful deployment. And so the way this is configured is that that's only going to happen for the production environment. So the development environment is still just going to go all at once. The production will go a lot more gradually, and we'll monitor for errors and roll back in the face of errors. So I don't think I don't think we'll have time to go through the whole demo, but if you go back over to the workshop, this is all explained, and you get to test this yourself. It's actually really fun to see what happens when you introduce the error and you start hitting your API endpoint. You can see in the code pipeline how it goes from blue to red, and the deployment just stops, and your Lambda function gets rolled back to the previous version.
No, that is excellent. Yeah. So, I mean, the canary deployments, we just had a chance to touch on it. This is all about using safe deploys, because obviously we don't want to just invoke Lambda, update to new versions of Lambda functions. And even though the tests are all passed, we want that slight sort of confidence. And so you can set up any metrics, any alarms you want. And, as soon as one of those gets tripped, latency may increase. So your test may pass, but your latency may be too big. And you can simply, roll that back. And that's, built into SAM and super useful. One just cool comment. I'm not going to be able to get to all of them, but Grant Lammy has a good idea. On local testing, don't call any AWS service from Lambda. Instead, use the AWS step functions SDK integrations for AWS services and keep your Lambda functions just easily testable data transformers. Excellent point. Yeah, if you don't know about step functions, SDK integrations, can talk to any SDK out there for AWS, and does mean you can remove a whole bunch of Lambda functions, which means you need to do less testing, which means you need to have less complicated CI/CD pipelines. So yeah, Brian, anything else for last few seconds of anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, thanks for having me, Julian. I think this was a lot of fun. I love the dialogue. Like I said, we all know that this is a really important topic for any workload, serverless or not serverless. There's an infinite number of ways to do this. So I love all the passion from the community. Go out and check out the workshop. We'd love to hear feedback. We're looking to to iterate on this, and get feedback from the community and see what people want to see more of. Like, what are your questions and how can it be improved? So be happy to take any of that feedback.
Yeah, and absolutely. Within AWS, we are, we're super cognizant that CI/CD is super important. So yeah, please try this workshop out. The cool thing is you can take what Brian's built today, try it out yourself, tweak and change your heart's content, and be able to see what's going to suit your application.
Yeah, and
so
I'll finally say, like, I've done the GitHub Actions, of course. I've done code pipeline. I'd love to know more about the Bitbucket, Jenkins, or there's one more, GitLab, I think, integration. So if anyone uses those, I would love to get your feedback on that.
Cool, excellent. And I mean, this also, never mind the safe deploys for Lambda, there's API gateway deploys as well. We could go into a whole kind of thing. We've only got a few seconds left. Up next week, we're talking about Lambda. Hopefully, I'm hoping this can happen with Lambda and DevOps Guru. So actually machine learning to look at your Lambda functions to make sure that everything is going all kind of good. Serverless patterns you probably know about, but serverlessland.com, everything to do with serverless, and AWS, a great landing page with everything to do with serverless, including I'm pretty sure a link to the CI/CD workshop. So Brian, thanks so much for joining us. It's really a pleasure to have you. Can't wait to have you back. And yeah, thanks for being a passionate advocate and doing a great job building a super workshop for CI/CD.
Thank you.
Thanks
Happy
so much.
to be here.
And thank you, everybody. We'll see you same place.